Hello Kerbal I'm Orbator and welcome to this tutorial showing you how to build rockets, or at least some of the things you should know when you're engineering your rocket to go places anywhere you want in the Kerbal's universe. Anyway, let's talk about this. First off, I want to talk about drag, because you got the new atmospheric model in the game. I suppose you could say that, let's change this engine. Main sail on there. Okay, atmospheric drag can cause all sorts of trouble to your rocket. Basically, I can't show you the atmospheric drag mark on you. Every part on this rocket causes drag, and if you accumulate all those ones which causes drag, then it'll be at one point in the center, like your center of mass. That's the center of mass. If you accumulate all the mass together, all the forces of that mass, it will accumulate there. Same with for atmospheric drag. And let's say you don't have these winglets in here, and because the most drag will be caused by the front of the rocket, the capsule and that, therefore it stands to reason that most of it atmospheric drag, if I talk slowly and think of what I'm going to say, then your rocket has the possibility of tipping over. And what you really want is your atmospheric drag, center of your drag, to be under your center of mass. That way the drag will pull it back and the center of mass will be the pivot point, so your rocket will be pointing forward and hopefully the direction that you're thrusting. Now there are a couple of ways that you can overcome this. Two of the most notable ones. The new one, which is, I go into aerodynamics, nose cones. Let's get the right size one, 2.5 meter. And if you put a nose cone around this, your capsule is now more aerodynamic. That actually saves you fuel going into space, only a little margin of delta V, but it does work and it helps in keeping your control of the rocket. Another way is to, again in aerodynamics, add winglets. This has two advantages. First off, it'll help you cut through the atmosphere, so it's like a knife, and as you know, once you start slicing with a knife, if you have, then the knife wants to go straight. The same with this, although it's in atmosphere, it's a bit fluidic, as you could say, then it'll wishy-washy about a bit, but it'll try to go straight. And also, these winglets here have control. I think some of these winglets don't have control, like this AV1 winglet, but the AVR8 winglet does have control, so it's able to stabilize your rocket and give you better control. So that's all I have to say about atmospheric drag. If you want to add something about it, then do so. I'm not going to go into how to fly your rocket. I'm not sure if I'll leave that until another tutorial, but that's one thing you have to get yourself more of an art form than engineering science. Right, next. Okay, next is thrust to weight ratio. What the hell is that? Well, thrust to weight ratio is, well, basically what it says. It's your ratio between your thrust and your weight. In other words, you can see up here, I've got Kerbal Engineering Redux mod, and thrust to weight ratio is 2.34 with full fuel tanks and 8.88 when the fuel tanks are empty. And basically that has to be over 1 when you're on a planet or planetary body of some kind, because you want to go up. And if it was below 1, then that means you'd probably go down and probably crash. But this has different readings. So, alright, if I put this on atmospherics and change the altitude, you see the thrust to weight ratio changes. Only slightly, but more I'm trying to get to, the point is that when you're up in space, the thrust to weight ratio doesn't matter so much. You've got a thrust to weight ratio of 0.10, as long as you have enough time to burn before crashing into the ground. If you're in space, then you'd be fine. But on the ground, it matters quite a bit. So that has to be over 1. So like the mass of your rocket pulling, the force of your mass of a rocket pulling down reversing the thrust of the engine, pushing up. Anyway, let's talk about calculations. I'm going to flash up a cheat sheet. Now, it's not really a cheat sheet, it just gives you formulas that you can work out from all the stuff in the game without having to use mods. Now, let's take this rocket. Okay. Thrust to weight ratio, to work that out, you need the thrust of the rocket divided by the mass times the gravitational force of the body you're on. So we're on Kirby. The mass of the rocket is 65.22 tons. I think that's, yeah, it's always in tons you calculate this as. So let's see, mass is 65.22. Okay, and we need a thrust, right? With the thrust of the engines, you can easily find it in the engine tab. Right click on the engine and it brings up all the information. Okay, so the thrust of this in an atmosphere is 1379.032 and in vacuum is 15,000. And I'll get on the differences between vacuum and atmospheres in a minute, but at the moment let's put the atmosphere, say this is our rocket launch from the ground, and then we put in the gravitational force of Kirby, which is 9.81 meters per second squared. That basically is the rate at which you fall towards the planet if you didn't have any atmosphere. Okay, put those numbers in, and I have a thrust to weight ratio of 2.155. Is that correct? Make sure. According to my calculation, that should be correct. Let's check what MechJeb says. Yep, my calculations were correct. I was mistakenly looking at the atmosphere, and if I click atmospheric on there, yes, that is correct. So you can work out your thrust to weight ratio without having to have a mod. That's easy enough until you get multiple engines, multiple stages, all the rockets fire at different times. Then you have to go into all the maths and thingies and all things. That's why I use this mod. Perfect. Okay, so I've also worked out that you get 2.34 meters per second. 2.34 thrust to weight ratio with this rocket in space. So that's good. That'll get us into orbit. Another note on thrust to weight ratio: when you're launching from the ground, I would find have at least 2 meters per second launching, and you can have multiple stages that are in the atmosphere. I found that having a thrust to weight ratio of 2 until you get into space is perfect. A little design tip, it could vary. That's from my findings so far, and don't forget, the new atmospheric model hasn't been out that long, so things could change, especially with Unity 5 update coming soon. Okay, next let's talk about Delta V. Okay, so what is Delta V? Delta V is basically means change in velocity. And say like this rocket here, as you see on this Engineering Redux mod, we've got 4,048 meters per second in space, Delta V. And what that means, if you were traveling at 0, you had no gravity or anything to slow you down, and you burnt all your rocket fuel, you travel at 4,048 meters per second. So that's the change of velocity that your rocket can give. Now that all changes when you go into atmosphere, and it also changes when you're different fuel ratios. I don't think it changes with thrust. Even if your thrust to weight ratio is down to under 1, your delta V would stay the same, because that's the change in velocity, not regarding gravity, although it does use gravity in its calculation. Okay, so let's talk about the calculation. Right, we have this rocket here, and to work it out, we get the natural log of the mass at the start divided by mass at the end. So first off, you get the mass at the start, which is, I refill these fuel tanks up, 65.22, same as the last one, and now we need the mass at the end. So reduce all the fuel in the fuel tanks, 0, and now our mass is 17.22 tons. Next, you need the efficiency of the engine, or ISP as it's called. So again, right click on the engine and go to ISP. Again, you have atmosphere and vacuum. Let's do the calculation for vacuum. So it's 310. Oh, sorry. Go back to the formula. It's divide the mass at the start by the mass at the end. Get the logarithmic natural log of that, which is equal to 1.33169 and whatever else. And then you times that by the ISP of the engine, which is in space 310. That gives you 412.82 and whatever else. And then you times that by the gravitational force. As we're on Kirby, it's 9.81. And that gives you 4,049 meters per second. Now let's refill these fuel tanks and see if we got that correct. Okay, so 4,048. That's close enough. That's probably rounding up of some figures, perhaps of the Kerbal Engine Redux. And not too sure about MechJeb. It seems a bit off. Perhaps it still needs some updates. So we'll kick you off there. And I said also you have atmospheric. Let's do a quick calculation. I've got an Excel sheet to calculate this. Let's change ISP to 285. That engine. And now the result is 3,723 in atmosphere. That's close enough. So we know this mod works close enough for us to use as a guide for this game. Anyway, that's how to work out your delta V. Obviously, if you add more engines, have multiple stages, that's all going to change. But that's the basics of rocketry. You need your delta V and your thrust weight ratio. Make sure it's aerodynamic. And now we can go to the advanced staging part. Okay, so what do I mean by advanced staging? Well, you see, most rockets you see are staged like this. They've got the rocket going up here, and then you have another stage under it. With another rocket. But have a look at the thrust weight ratio. That's gone down completely. It's gone under 2, which is what I'd normally recommend. And the delta V extra isn't as much more as you'd expect it. We're almost got double fuel tanks here, almost, but we haven't got almost double the fuel, double the delta V. So rather than doing it that way, what you could do is if we get the radial decouplers, add the fuel tanks to the outside of the rocket. Add some engines. Now we got slightly more delta V there because of the way we set that up. But we've added a lot more weight. But if we do this, go to the external fuel tank duct, connect that into the center tank so they feed the center tank. Make sure all the staging is correct. And did we get any extra delta V? Yes, we did. So you get 6,440 meters per second. Your thrust weight ratio is correct. I think where I was mistaken with the staging was like this, meaning that the outer rockets will fire, take us up, decouple them, and then the center rocket will fire. That is one way of doing this. This way you have the extra thrust weight ratio as well as the extra delta V. Now another method you can do to improve this is called Asparagus staging. I'll set her up in candle-like form, so let's place that there. Copy that part, place it out here, and so the fuel ducts go to there. Right, the outer rockets will decouple first. Let's stage these correctly. The outer rocket will burn faster than all the others because all the fuel is feeding from the outer rockets to the inner tanks to get to the center tank. So when this is empty, you can ditch that. Then with that staging, then these three tanks will be full. Then once the outer tanks are empty, they'll be ditched, and the center rocket will be full. And that's called Asparagus staging. Bits on the outside will fall off in stages. And look, we got 6,704, slightly more delta V. Said you get diminishing returns, but this looks a bit horrible. You can add multiple stages going further out, but that's just a bit too much. So let's put these over here. Change that fuel duct. Go to these tanks. Now that looks a bit more compact design, and still it gives us the same delta V. So this is called Asparagus staging. As I said, you can have something called onion staging, where rather than having all these attached around a circle, you'd have them going into the center rocket, but you have multiple stages on the outside of each of them. Like so. And so on and so forth. So let's say you'd feed it in like that. Yeah, and it's a type of asparagus staging, but this is more referred to as onion staging. But again, this becomes bulky. And this game is all about efficiency. Well, you could build these huge rockets to get into space, but I prefer the more efficient approach. Okay, so let's talk about rocket engines. Right, you have different rocket engines. In fact, you don't just have rocket engines, you have xenon gas engines, and you have jet engines, and you even have hybrid engines. So what are the difference with these? Okay, so jet capsule, and then we get a fuel tank, so we can go with comparisons. Right, the first thing to note with rocket engines, you have, as I said before, thrust differences in a vacuum and an atmosphere. Take note on which is the best, and depending on what you want. Thrust weight ratio on these are minuscule, so you need quite a few, and delta V is terrible, especially in an atmosphere. Okay, to tell if they're efficient, use the ISP. See, this is the ISP at 250 in an atmosphere, 219 in a vacuum. They're okay, I suppose, for usage, depending if you want a radial rocket. But using LV909 engine on something like this is much more efficient, as it has an ISP in a vacuum of 345. But really, it stinks in an atmosphere. That's where you'd get the larger rocket engines, like the LV-T30, which has a better ISP in an atmosphere. And these are the ones that you use to get into space. See, even though thrust is perfect for atmospheric flight. Okay, now you also have things like these, the larger rockets. Now that ISP is absolutely terrible in atmosphere, but really brilliant in vacuum. So that you'd use that to get large rockets up into space, and you can use that to get around the Kerbal system. Like Garrett Conley to Duna. Get out the atmosphere for the large rockets, I suppose you'd use this, the Mammoth. And I believe these parts, even this solid rocket fuel booster, are from the NASA pack, which added asteroids to the game to recreate their mission to redirect asteroids to orbit Kerbal. Okay, so this Bohr engine, as I was saying, has a better ISP in atmosphere and a good thrust in atmosphere as well. So yeah, have a look at the ISP depending on where you want to go. You want to include this mod because it does calculate everything. Now let's have a look at solid rocket boosters. Now these are brilliant because they give you a high thrust to weight ratio, but they give you really stinks at delta V. And that's why they're called boosters, because they boost. That's why the space shuttle used them, because it boosted it up to the altitude until it got to a certain altitude where the liquid fuel engines had enough thrust to weight ratio to finish the orbit burn. So they're relatively good. I've done a challenge before and they landed on the moon with just SRBs and just only succeeded. If you count a Kerbal Can't Come Home as succeeding. Anyway, let's talk about jet engines. Right, jet engines, you do need atmospheric intakes. Because they use the oxygen from the air rather than the oxidizer from the tank. See, if I reduce the oxidizer, that's just dead weight, it's increasing delta V. You have two jet engines here. You have the basic one, which gives you a higher ISP, where it does not have as much thrust. I think has a limit of speed. The ramjet, which gives you a higher speed, maximum speed, higher thrust, but a lower ISP. So it can't go as far, I suppose, or not as efficient, rather than not as far. You also have the Rapier engine here, which is brilliant because it is an atmospheric engine, air breathing, and it is a closed cycle, which means that it is a rocket engine. And that's good for S.S.T.Os to get them off launch them in air breather mode, get them up in space, then turn them to rocket mode without having to stage any engines. Now you have various sizes engines for what you need. The toroidal air spike, I don't think I've ever used that. Well, it does give you a high thrust ratio but low delta V. And you also have these engines like separators. These are basically not engines to launch you, but say you stage, you boost them to separate rocket stages. Okay, so I'm not sure what else I'm going to cover with engines. You have different sizes for different size rockets, you have different efficiencies. The best thing to do is mess around, have a mod perhaps that tells you the delta V that you're going to have from that engine compared to another one, and mess around. But the last one, the one I think is the most brilliant in this game, you have to have a xenon tank though, and rather liquid fuel, and a xenon engine. Now this takes a massive amount of electric charge. If I right click on it, see, it takes electric charge. Most of the other engines generate electric charge. The xenon engine takes electric charge, so you have to have battery packs, solar panels, make sure you have enough energy for it, and it uses xenon gas. But if you can do that, there's a terrible thrust to weight ratio, but once it's in space that doesn't matter. There is extremely high delta V. From this small tank I can get 12,000 meters per second. That's almost enough to get anywhere, but it's a really slow thrust, so changing your speed is really tiny. So that's perfect for space probes, and there are space probes out there which use this. Let's use this engine. Anyway, I think that's all I'm going to cover on engines. I'm not an expert, I don't pretend to be. This is just what I basically know and what I've been using in the game. I think the last thing for this tutorial, I'm going to go into stages. Okay, stages. Stages are for particular events of your rocket. Now let's flash up a delta V map. Okay, so this delta V map shows you the speeds the delta V require from getting from A to B. Say like getting to the moon. You see on Kirby it says 4,500 meters per second on the center. That's to get into orbit. and then you have a line going across to the man, and it says 860. That's to get to the man, your transfer burn. And then it says 210 outside of the man. That's to get in orbit around the man once you transfer there. And then the center of the man, you have 640 meters per second. That's to land on the man, and I think it's about similar to launch on the man, probably less than that. But if you use these figures, you'd ensure that you have enough delta V to get back and forth. Okay, so adding those figures together, we need 7,920 meters per second. But as I said, you always engineer a rocket in reverse. So first off, let's start with a capsule. In fact, let's do this with a larger capsule. Now, I'm not going to add aerodynamics and things like that. We're just going to simply show you how you built it. Excuse me, you have to add your landing legs and all sorts, but we're not going to do that because that adds weight and I'm not concerned. Moment. Okay, so we need, for return to Kirby, we need 860 meters per second. For return to 210 meters per second to get into orbit around the man, and 640 for takeoff. In total, that's 1,710. So let's add a fuel tank. And a rocket engine. Let's get the poodle. Now this is going to be on the man, so click on there, and you see the man thrust ratio is 10. So that's enough to get us into orbit from the man. It says 2,547 meters per second. That's more than enough. That'll definitely get us back to Kirby from the man. But there is a thing, but we could use this stage for getting to the man, because add another 640 meters per second for the transfer, and we need 2,000 in total, 2,350 meters per second. So what you could do is add 3 fuel tanks. Now it doesn't need that much fuel, so let's add a small fuel tank. And then get the fuel duct fuel from the outer tanks to the inner tank. And make sure your staging is correct. 3,142. Alright, that's enough to land on the man. Yeah, that's enough to land on the man, return, and to Kirby. But we want to get this to the man first, and for that we need another stage. So we go to the fuel tanks. Let's use this tank. We need about, to get to the man, we need 640 meters per second. And to get to the man, sorry, we need 860 meters per second. And add another poodle to there. Okay, so that gives us 1,811 meters per second. That's quite a bit. That will definitely get us there. It's over the amount. You could even reduce the amount of fuel to reduce it to 1,000. So wait. Okay, that's enough. Now we got 1,000 meters per second to get there. But before we go transferring to the man, we need to get into orbit. As I said, all building of rockets are done in reverse. So what you're going to do last, return to Kirby, to what you're going to do first. So let's go big, shall we? We need 4,500 meters per second to get into orbit. Kirby. And so we go to structural. The adapter to make big rockets. Well, let's add some big rockets. I'm not sure how many fuel tanks we need. Test that. No, not enough to get us into orbit. Fuel tank. Yeah, this engine. 3,620 meters per second. We're almost there. What you could do is structural, get the radial decouplers, set up an Asparagus staging. This time with these booster engines with liquid fuel tanks on them. Yeah, that's proper now. And if I get this staging correct, 3,770 meters per second. Not there, so let's add 2 more. And now let's fuel duct them. And then stage them correctly. Okay, these 2 tanks want to be ditched first. Yes, correct, 2 there. But there's no radial decoupler there. Okay, now we can fit that on there. The old fuel ducts should. No, they haven't. Control Z to undo. Connect that up properly. Okay. Then ditch first. And there's 2. There's 3. And stage these up to here. Now this is Asparagus staging in its basic form, just a 4 stage. And if we have a look at our delta V, 4,916. This will definitely get us into orbit, although it's a big ass rocket to do so. And what you probably do is you have 2 stages for getting into orbit. You could even add a little extra fuel to this to finish your staging getting into orbit. Let's get rid of these. You're at 5,090. That's not enough. You'd still add boosters, I suppose, to that, but you use this engine to your final orbit stage, as well as transfer it to the Moon. Anyway, that is the basics of rocket staging. Anything else you want to know? Let me know, because I have not transmuted or whatever gone further than building rockets like these. I've done multiple stages. I've done rockets with rovers on them and other things. I have not dabbled in aeroplanes or space planes for that matter. I always thought of building a space shuttle, but I have not dabbled in that. And because of the new aerodynamics, I think I will get to that, and I'll sort of do a tutorial on learning how to build a space shuttle where I keep on failing and until we succeed. Anyway, as I said, that is all for this episode. I'm not sure where else I can add to it. Let me know in the comments below what you think, if these tips help you. Don't forget though, atmospheric drag matters a lot in this game now, so always add your fairings. And let me know how you get on with your rocket building. I'm Orbator, thanks for watching, I will see you next time. Trust me, I'm an engineer.